Good day, people! Today we're going to be taking a look at, in my opinion, one of the best decks in Standard right now, which is Granblue, together with Basskirk and the totally not Dark Souls boss that is Skull Dragon. So, this deck, from all my testing, is really strong. It's also, I feel, the most complex of all the Standard decks so far, just because there's so many trains of thought that you go through. There's a lot of decision trees and things like that, where the decision you make this turn may impact something in 3 turns and things like that. And I know a lot of the G players and, just G players in general who like that kind of complexity will enjoy this deck a lot, because it's not so much where you just drop down cards and, let things rip. It's really just, you have to think every single turn, and that makes it very complex, but in a different way. I think Hunter Surge put it a good way. It's complex, not in the sense that you need to know, really complex combos, but it's complex in the sense of, will the decision that you make right now be worth it in 2 turns? That's sort of what you're kind of looking at, and I think that's going to interest a lot of people, and it is obviously a more complex deck to play, so I think for new players it might be a little bit scary, but I'll try to still explain it in a way that's accessible to everyone. And also the game that I'm going to show you afterwards will be with Mr. Solemn Vanguard. I was teaching him tabletop, so it's a bit slower because of that, so this video might end up being quite long. Depends on my explanations, obviously, but because of that, I do apologize, but we both use the same deck in that game, so you're going to get to see a lot of the different angles of play throughout that game. So, getting into it, this is a Protect clan, obviously, and we do run the Zombie starter, which is the only starter that's available, and then our main grade 3 is the Basskirk. So, his first skill is Vanguard Continuous. During your turn, if you have 10 or more cards in your drop zone, he gets plus 5k power and plus 1 critical. And that is all this guy needs to be super pressure worthy, and combined with his second skill, he ends up being a pretty big beater himself, and you really don't need any other grade 3s on your Vanguard circle outside of this to really put in work. So his second skill is an Act Vanguard circle once per turn, Cow Blast 1, Soul Blast 1, and then if you do, you choose a card from your drop zone and call it to Rearguard circle, and then for each grade of that unit, the Basskirk gains plus 5k. So if you call a grade 3, Basskirk gains 15k. If you call a grade 1, he gains 5, etc, etc. What's nice is that the card that you Soul Blast is the card that you can actually call if you want to. If you've been milling triggers and everything like that, and your drop zone just isn't looking so good, but let's say you have a Ruin Shade or something in your soul, you can Soul Blast that Ruin Shade to call it out immediately because you Soul Blast before you resolve the skills. So that's definitely super nice, and that makes the card very good. I think it's very simple to understand. It's just really good because it's your main engine. It's the main thing that makes your combos, it makes your field, it makes your big plays, but it also has a lot of pressure because it builds up to 27, 32k on its own. Maybe 22k is the minimum usually, unless you don't have 10 cards in drop zone, which you might not on the first grade 3 ride, but usually by the 4th turn you do. So I think it's really good for that reason, and this card is just insane. Then I play 3 Skull Dragons. I very strictly think that 4 is too much, because you don't want to be riding into him, because you want to ride into Basskirk at all times, and you have tools in the deck to help you ride into him. I think some people even play 2, and I think that's okay. 1 is definitely too little, because you want to have 2 just because of 1 card that I'll explain later. But 3 is also the reason why I play 3, I can just kind of scroll to it, is because of this Evil Shade. But 3 I think is fine, because that way you have a higher chance to hit it in your drop zone earlier, but you don't want to, even if you hit all 3, that's fine. But I think, you don't want to have 4, because risking riding into him isn't nice. Even though he has the Protect, it just isn't all that great. Because, sure, he gets the extra power, but you really want to be sitting on the Basskirk instead. But outside of that, I should go over his skills, actually. In hand, he has the skill that you cannot normal call him, so you must call him from the drop zone or otherwise, but that's actually the only other way. And then his Vanguard and Rearguard Continuous skill is, during your turn, for each card in your drop zone, he gets plus 2k power. So if you have 10 cards in drop zone, he gets plus 20k. This thing scales like crazy, so that turns him into one of the scariest Rearguards that you have in the deck. And then his third skill is, at the end of the battle that he attacked, you have to retire him. So he cannot stay around, and after the battle that he attacks, he will go away. So that's important to keep in mind. But he's your biggest attacker. He's honestly, he puts in the most work in the deck in late game, and honestly, that's what kind of makes it worth to push your opponent to 4 or 5 damage earlier on, where in other decks you might not, because you risk on, the plays that they can make, and whether you can make enough pressure to end them once they're at 4 or 5. But with this deck, you can do it really easily, and so having them sit at 4 is really important, because then Basskirk has the most pressure as well, so you want to really push them to 4 damage quite early, but Skull Dragon is really good, but I think 3 is the best number. Then I play one of each of the Negro Breach as well as the Violence Franger. So Negro Breach, I know a lot of people don't like him that much, but I think 1 is a perfect amount. His first skill is Vanguard and Rearguard Circle. During your turn, if you have 10 or more cards in your drop zone, he gets plus 10k. Very simple. He does have the Protect marker, which is very important for that second skill, which is an act in the drop zone. You counterblast 2, and then you call this card to a Rearguard Circle. But if you're grade 2 or higher, and you didn't ride a Vanguard this turn, so you've been grade stuck on grade 2 basically, instead of calling him, you can ride him. So he is the very rare chance ride fixer because he does have the Protect 2, so riding him really isn't all that bad if you cannot get any other grade 3, which really doesn't happen that often. But sometimes when you're really far ahead and you have your counter charges and you have like 5 damage or something and you have like 4 open damage, it's sometimes worth to use his effect because he's a 22k attacker on his own, which, believe me or not, it is actually quite nice because you can make some pretty beefy columns with basically any booster, and then because of that, that makes him quite nice because sometimes instead of having a 9k grade 2 sitting there, you can just replace him with the Breach and then make it a 22. And so hitting for those big numbers is nice, even with a 6k booster who's going to be hitting for 28. So I think it's definitely quite nice. But again, it's one of those win more cards, and so is this. And the only reason why we can afford to run these kind of like one-ofs is because of Granblue's nature of really being able to fetch those one-ofs quite easily. So with Franger, I think he was the most underwhelming card, or the most disappointing card. His skill is a Vanguard and Rearguard Circle act once per turn, Soul Blast to grade 3, and you can discard any number of cards from your hand. And then he gets plus 5k power until end of turn, so just 5k, and during the battle that it attacked, your opponent cannot call Sentinels nor cards with the same grade as the cards you discarded for this cost to Guardian Circle from hand. So that means that when you use a skill, you have to Soul Blast to grade 3, which means you either have to early Soul Charge it, which I'll say how, or you have to ride again. So, and then the discard part is basically, if you don't discard anything, then he only blocks Sentinels. If you discard a grade 0, he blocks Sentinels and grade 0s. If you discard a 0, 1, 2, he blocks Sentinels and 0s, 1s, and 2s, so your opponent basically can't guard against it. So that's the scary part about it, and you know, I think he's okay. I would maybe even cut him for another grade 2, I think, because, or maybe like another, I don't know if you want another Breach, but I think it's fine as a one-off because there are situations where he can actually win you the game, because if you're really far ahead, which there can be far ahead against quite a lot of matchups that aren't Spike Brothers, you can actually punish your opponent really well with a Franger. So I think as a one-off, it doesn't hurt anyone. Like, if you draw into it in your opening hand, you just mulligan it back, even if it's your only grade 3, because I think it's really not worth writing it, because you miss out on the Protect and you're more likely to draw into something better in that case. So that's just my opinion on that. Then going into our grade 2s, we have 4 Ruin Shade, one of the MVPs in the deck. 9k grade 2, but has the Vanguard and Rearguard skill, that when it attacks a Vanguard, you can mill the top 2 cards of your deck. For new players, mill means taking the top card of your deck and putting it into your drop zone. I'm going to repeat that word a lot throughout this, so do make sure to remember it, but you mill the top 2 cards of your deck, and then for that battle, she gains plus 4k power. And then her second skill is a Rearguard skill, continuous. During your turn, if you have 10 or more cards in your drop zone, she gets plus 4k. So, potential 17k attacker, but otherwise just a 13k attacker in the earlier games, or in the earlier stages of the game, rather. But still very good for setting up your drop zone, and you sometimes even call multiples in early game just to set up that drop zone, because having 10 cards in drop zone by turn 3 is really, really big. Or even 9, because then you can Soul Blast 1, and you know, you can build up the 10th really easily by just guarding once before you ride into the grade 3. So I think she's really important for a very simple reason, and that's basically it. Our next really important grade 2 is Mr. Night Mist. On call, when you place him on Rearguard Circle, Counterblast 1. If you do, you call a grade 1 from your drop zone to Rearguard Circle, but if you have 10 or more cards in your drop zone, you can call any grade from your drop zone. So in early game, this is good for calling out some of your other important grade 1s, but otherwise, in late game, you can use his skill to call yourself a Skull Dragon, which is really nice, or call a Ruin Shade, or a Blue Blood. So Super good card for a very simple reason. It's counterblast 1 to call something, and you're going to be able to get something you want almost every time. In early game, you might have the problem that you didn't mill enough grade 1s maybe, so that can be a problem, but I believe he is grade 1 or less, so you can call a trigger if you want to. You know, it might be the booster that you're missing, but he is a good card and definitely worth running a 4 of. This is also a good card, which is Blue Blood, but sadly I only have space for 3. But his first skill is Rearguard Circle during your turn. If you have another Blue Blood in your drop zone, then he gets plus 4k, so he's a 13k attacker. And then his second skill is, when his attack hits a Vanguard, you can retire him to draw 2 cards and put 1 from your hand into the drop zone, which is really strong because that's super good on hit pressure. The fact that he gains plus 4k, and actually I should mention that the plus 4k that both Ruin Shade and Blue Blood gain are really good because that's 13k against Force grade 3s in case you're going second. And so his skill is also really nice once you get the second Blue Blood, and even if you don't, that on-hit skill doesn't require you to have a Blue Blood in the drop zone. So if you do manage to hit going first, for example, that's going to be really big because you draw an extra card. You know, he goes to drop zone, but you really don't care because you want him in the drop zone to revive him anyway, and to free up your rearguard circles for maybe you want to call Skull Dragon next turn or something. And then, you know, you get yourself an extra card in hand, and you choose anything in your hand to discard. So sometimes you might have too many Skull Dragons in your hand, or maybe, you know, too many Ruin Shades. So you can discard anything from your hand, and that makes him super, super good. Then we have 4 Romario, very important card. First skill is quite simple. If you have 10 or more cards in your drop zone, he gains plus 4k, so he's a 12k attacker slash booster. You might actually use him for attacking against some matchups, but usually he'll just be there as a booster. But the most important part of his skill is that second one. When you ride on top of him, counterblast 1 and put a card from your hand into your soul, and then you mill the top 3 cards from your deck, and then you choose 1 card in your drop zone and add it to your hand. This is a really interesting card because there might be games where if you're going first, it might even be worth... I've had to do this, but I wrote a Romario over Romario just because I didn't have a Basskirk and I really needed it. So, because essentially if you don't have a Basskirk, Romario helps you to mill and then take a card from your drop zone, add it to your hand. So for example, what you might do is go into grade 1 and then call something like this that we'll go over in a second to mill some more. And then when you ride, you'll have 5 or well even 6 cards to choose from in your drop zone, which might be something that you're missing. But I think if you're far ahead, you obviously wouldn't do that, or if you have everything that you need in your hand, you obviously wouldn't do that. But in those very desperate scenarios, it might be worse to use Romario. So that kind of rhymed. But Romario is a really good card just for that second skill. And also what you can do is put something like Skull Dragon or like a grade 2 or grade 3 into your soul. With his first, with that cost, because if you plan to use Franger, you need to Soul Blast the grade 3. So to avoid riding grade 3 a second time, you can just put a grade 3 into the soul. That way you're kind of cheating 1 turn with Romario. So it's a really interesting card, definitely a 4 of. It's really good for a lot of reasons. Then I played 2 Evil Shade. He has a really simple act, a rearguard circle once per turn, counterblast 1 and bind one of the cards from your drop zone. And then if you do, you choose a card from your drop zone that is the same as the card that you bound and call it to rearguard circle. This is like, the reason I play 2 is this is a really good card, but it's dead early game. And even in mid game sometimes it really depends on your drop zone. But in late game this card is a beast because the combos you can do are wild. Like you can, let's say, use your, I don't know, Basskirk. Let's say you have no cards in hand. Basskirk to call out Night Mist. Night Mist calls out your Evil Shade. Evil Shade can bind, let's say, a Skull Dragon to call another Skull Dragon. You didn't use any cards from your hand to put 3 cards on your field, which is actually wild. And then if you have, for example, a Dancing Cutlass, then you even get another card on the field. So these are those kind of like, you know, 0 card hand full field plays that you can do, and Evil Shade is really good for that. I usually put it, you know, you can just leave it in the back unless you're playing as Kagero, which, you know, if you're playing as Kagero you have a good matchup anyway because if they snipe your stuff you take it, you know, open-handedly. But this is a really good card. It's just that it doesn't do much in early game because you often don't have 2 of the same card that early, because you need to have 2 cards of the 2 of the same card in your drop zone to use a skill, you know, effectively. And sometimes, you know, if it's 2 cutlasses, obviously you don't want to use it on them because you want to use it on his own skill. So it's a really good card, but I think only 2 of is fine, because by the time you want to use him, you most likely have milled at least 1. So that's the kind of logic that I went in testing this deck, and it worked out perfectly fine. Then, the low-key MVP is Ghosty Norman. This card is really, really nice. So he has an Act, Rearguard Circle. Retire him, and mill the top 2 cards of your deck, and then for that turn, give one of your other units plus 10k power. So, this card is the nuts, because he gives you really good early access to mill, and for example, as I said, you can ride into the Romario, use Norman to mill 2 more, that way you already have 3 cards in your drop zone, and then you can actually ride on top of the Romario next turn, and you have 6 cards to choose from for what you want to put to your hand. So this card is really, really, really nice, and it helps you set up for the Basskirk even faster, and that just makes him so good. I could only fit in 3, but I think 3 is fine. I ran into him a lot in early game, and I would obviously get him by the time I needed him, but early to mid game he's so crucial in setting up that really fast drop zone, and just overall, for the overall game plan, he's just amazing. Like, there's a lot of cards, you can see there's a lot of good cards that I just want to run in this that are at the number that they are. Like, this is a good card, this is a good card, this is a good card, but they're not run at 4 of just because slightly better cards need to be run at 4 of, you know, and that's just how it is. So our last grade 1 is the Dancing Cutlass. Drop zone skill Act, you bind another Dancing Cutlass from your drop zone, and then you mill 1, and then you call this Dancing Cutlass from your drop zone and countercharge 1. So you have to have 2 Dancing Cutlasses in your drop, because you bind one of them, and then you mill 1, and then you call him out and countercharge 1. And he is the only countercharge in the deck, but a very reliable way of doing so, because he also places himself on the field, so you get a 6k booster, which, you know, works out fine behind Vanguard. It can hit for force numbers that way, and so it's perfectly fine. The Dancing Cutlass is a really good card, and you definitely want to run it as a 4 of, just because you need to bind it, you know, from your drop zone, so you want to have all 4 in your drop zone throughout the game. And then our trigger lineup is very standard. 8 crit, 4 draw, 4 heal. This is the typical trigger lineup for Granblue that you're going to see, and that's basically it. So, I've already taken quite some time to explain this deck, but there's a lot of really intricate, in-depth things that this deck can do. But now let's take a look at it in-game. And now getting into the game, as I said before, this is me playing against Mr. Solemn Vanguard. I was teaching him how Tabletop works like an hour or 2 hours before we actually recorded this, and the game ended up being quite long. I think the total length of the game was over 30 minutes, like 32 or 33, and I sped up this video by like 280% or something, or 250%, quite a lot. So if some plays appear fast, that might be why. So I get pretty lucky here. I get the Romario first ride, which means that I'm going to be able to search something from my drop. But, you know, I was thinking, should I call the Norman earlier, you know, to try and have more choice with the Romario? But I was like, look at this hand. This hand is so nice. There's no reason to use the Romario. So I put the grade 3 into Soul. As you can see, my mill was also amazing. I got a Night Mist, a Ruin Shade, another Romario. Like, absolute, like, things are just popping right now. So I get myself another Ruin Shade. I mill with Romario. I get a Perfect Guard down, which is not the end of the world. I get another one down, which is slowly approaching the end of the world, but still not super bad. And so now we have a Cutlass. He damages a blue blood. I mill another 2, and also no triggers there as well. And right now my drop zone is really good, because I already have a considerate number of cards in the drop, and on top of that, there are a lot of good units in there as well. You know, honestly, more units for me, more good units for me to target than I can actually call. So that's actually a really good sign. But as he did go first, he does go into the Basskirk before I do. So he does have 3 damage to work with here, and, you know, I feel like, again, as I mentioned with the deck, you can really push them to 4 and then pressure them a lot with the Basskirk, because then they have to essentially Perfect Guard all the time. Because this is the mirror match, that's part of the reason why this game took so long, is because we're both taking, like, we start our turn, like, stand and draw, and then we think for like 2 or 3 minutes of like, is this the right move? Is this the right move? Etc. So yeah, so as you can see, he is milling for the Ruin Shade, or no, I believe that was, no, that was for the Norman. That was for the Norman. But now he's attacking with the Basskirk and he gets a draw, as well as the Night Mist, which is also a good card to have in hand. And now he still has 2 Ruin Shades to potentially get 2 more cards in his drop zone. Well, 4 more cards actually, but the reason why he had to set up double Ruin Shade is because prior to this turn starting, he had 2 cards in drop zone, one of them being a Skull Dragon. So I jokingly said to him, you know, you could easily call the Skull Dragon for a whopping 2k plus power. So, you know, over time he will skyrocket in power, but for now, he wasn't looking too strong. So now we're already at the solid 10 in drop zone, which is the amount that you want to be at. You know, as I said, it's optimal to be at least 10 drop zone by turn 3, and as you can see, I got to do exactly that. My hand is looking quite okay too. I have the Night Mist, I have the Ruin Shade, I also have the Franger, but I'm definitely not going to go into it this early because my opponent is at 3 damage. I'm just wasting cards in my hand by doing it, and it's definitely not worth it. But here, I'm thinking about the chain of calling, because I can call something with Basskirk and I can call something with Night Mist, but I can also use Basskirk to call a Night Mist for my drop, and then call something like a Blue Blood, or maybe just taking, I don't know, like a Romario, but the Romario would only be a 12k boost, so I'm really not sure, but I choose to use the Basskirk to call the Skull Dragon from my soul immediately, and then I'm gonna call the Blue Blood, not the Blue Blood, the Night Mist from my drop zone and call out a Norman. Norman skill will mill me 2 more cards, and I was really aiming to get myself another Cutlass there, because I know that next turn I'm going to need that Counterblast, and so I was really hoping to mill into a Cutlass there because I still have 3 copies, or maybe 2 copies left in deck, because I think I damage checked 1 if I'm not mistaken. But here I am attacking, and the camera does zoom around a lot, but trust me, normally this was a lot slower because this is like 250 times faster. Oh, no, not that, it's 2.5 times faster, sorry, than normal. And so that's why it looks like I'm zooming around so fast, but it's just because now we go back to Solemn's turn and he's taking a while to make up, you know, his decisions for how he's going to play out this turn. So, you know, I think my last turn was okay. I pushed him to 4 damage, which is where I want him to be. I think it's an optimal field because I get to, you know, he's going to let one of them through because one of them is hitting for an alright amount, like the Night Mist, because of the boost from the Norman, but then the Skull Dragon is obviously hitting for a whopping amount of power, and unless you have a Perfect Guard, you have, like, even if you have a Perfect Guard, if it's hitting you for 1 damage, you don't really have much of a reason to even guard it, because, like, what is it gonna take you? It's gonna take you 1 damage, and sure, then you're gonna have to Perfect Guard the Basskirk next turn, but at the end of the day, it's just not worth to Perfect Guard it at that state, because you'd rather save the Perfect Guards for Basskirk anyway, because even when you're in 3 damage, the Basskirk can be quite a bit of pressure because them checking 1 crit means you're dead. So it's just one of those scenarios where you really have to be careful in your guarding decisions, and I think, you know, playing against this deck while using the same deck really shows these kind of interesting choices that you have. So now we're going to see that actually Solemn got both of the Cutlasses off in 1 turn. So he went from, you know, basically almost everything face down to face up in his damage zone, so that's definitely very lucky. Here I tutor pass it, so he's debating on where he wants to put the crit, because as you can see from the power counters, I made sure to really pay mind to all the power counters in this game, because that way I can focus more on talking about the different, you know, interactions and stuff like that, while you still see what's happening with the power. So here he gets a double mill with the Ruin Shade, both of them being triggers, so I'm having a little bit of a salute over here, because that's definitely good for me, and I get the draw as well. So now this makes his Ruin Shade a bit harder to hit, and I'm debating as well, because I can guard this Ruin Shade a bit easier, but do I want the other Counterblast? Or do I want to simply guard this and then just work with 1 Counterblast for that turn and essentially pray that I can get a Cutlass, either top deck it or something like that? But overall, my luck with the Cutlasses wasn't so good this game. But there was a few more games we played where I managed to do one of those like no hand combos where you like make the whole field out of having no cards in hand by just using Basskirk's skill. So I'm afraid that it's a bit unfortunate, but I didn't really get to do it that much in this game. But I think it's still, just by watching both of us and how we play out the deck, I think you're able to see how the deck really functions, and I think that's one of the strong parts of having this mirror match as a whole. So here I'm debating the Franger. I place it on the field, but don't worry, I'm going to take it back, because I realize that I don't have another grade 3 in the soul, and there's no real reason to use the Franger if I don't, obviously. So Here I quickly confirm and I put it right back in my hand. The reason why I wanted to use it, if I would have had the grade 3 in the soul, the reason why I would have used it is because I have the crit pressure with Basskirk, and then if I check even one crit and put on the Franger, that makes it a lot harder for them to guard, and that's obviously a very good thing. I think one of the other things with Franger that I didn't mention in the when we were going over the deck is that the combo between Franger and Norman the Ghosty is really strong, because Franger only gets 5k on his own, but by putting him up by another 10k with Franger, you actually end up having a very threatening unit. So I think that's one of the other reasons why I still want to keep the 1-of in there, and I think it does make sense. So here he does guard it by intercepting with the Rune Shade. Also one of the reasons why I haven't been attacking his Rune Shades, because obviously against Granblue, it's a bit of a weird stance where you're attacking rear guards because you know that they can revive. But the reason why I haven't been attacking the Rune Shades is because they're not threatening units to me, because he can fill up his drop zone, but also if he keeps using them and doesn't call over them, he's gonna deck out eventually. And because they only get a plus 8k power boost at this stage, to me it's not as threatening as if, you know, I gave him the space to easily call out a Skull Dragon. So that's why sometimes when I have a field like that, I intercept quite aggressively, because I know that I can set up a better front row the next turn and not have to rely on things like Rune Shade, or let's say like a Dead Night Mist that already did his skill before. So for that reason, I didn't attack his rearguards and I focused very hard on his Vanguard, because now that I've pushed him to 5, my next turn is looking quite solid too, because I have a Skull Dragon in the drop zone, and then if I were to protect this turn and be able to, you know, with a second Counterblast maybe pick up the other Skull Dragon, I think that would be possible. So I think, looking back at it actually, I'm now reflecting, because at the time that the game finished I was like thinking what I could have done better. But now I'm thinking that the Night Mist in my hand could actually put in a lot of work, because essentially the play from here on could be that I use the Protect to discard the Skull Dragon, and then I'd be able to re-ride into my Vanguard to get another Protect marker, and then get one Skull Dragon from my drop zone, and then, you know, if I'm given 2 Counterblast this turn, use the Night Mist, you know, call Night Mist wherever, and then call another Skull Dragon, and then when he's on 5 damage, that probably would have been enough. But I believe there will be something that essentially a misplay, or a misguard rather, that I make in this turn, which prevents me from doing that efficiently. So we'll see how things develop, but that's just me reflecting as we go right here. Looking at Solemn's board though, he does have that massive Skull Dragon setup and the Blue Blood, which I think is a really good thing, because he has another Blue Blood in drop. I think the question here was that I'm on 3 damage, and he doesn't really have the possibility to push me for game, because I do have the Protect marker, he can see it, I can see it, and, you know, for that simple reason, I will not be able to, he will not be able to push me to enough of a boundary that I will have to, you know, Perfect Guard the Skull Dragon or something. You know, I can Perfect Guard the Vanguard. If he doesn't get double crit, I can just let the Skull Dragon hit, for example. So in that sense, he can't really push all out right now, because, you know, there could be better things that he could be doing. So I think the Blue Blood is the right play, because this puts me in a situation where I have to PG the Vanguard, and then I either have to take a Skull Dragon that might have crits on it, and what do you know, he checks a crit, or I have to take the Blue Blood, which, you know, is only hitting me for 1 damage, but he gets 2 extra cards in hand if I let him hit. But at this stage, if I'm not mistaken, he has quite a low amount of cards in deck, and because of that, I even think right now that it would have been good to let the Blue Blood pass, because then he would have had a really low amount of cards in deck if this did pass. But as you can see, he's now attacking with it, and, you know, while we're calculating and everything, I do decide to guard. So I do intercept and drop the Night Mist, and this was the mistake, is that I dropped the Night Mist, and the reason why is because I have the Franger in my hand, and I'm like, oh, well, I can just call the Franger next turn and discard the Ruin Shade for the grade 2 block, and then maybe top deck into a grade 1 to block off all guards. But in the end, I don't top deck a grade 1 for the second turn in a row, and then I'm not able to use the Franger. So what would have been the better play is to drop the Ruin Shade there instead of the Night Mist, and actually dropping that Night Mist there is a very bad move, because he's on 5 damage. What I should have done is to use my Basskirk now to call a Skull Dragon, which I'm pretty sure I'm going to do. Yes, I am going to do. And then I would have used the Night Mist to have called out another Skull Dragon, and it just wouldn't be like he would need 3 Perfect Guards this turn, and we've already seen I think 1 or 2 in his drop zone. So I was thinking, you know, I was thinking that he didn't even have enough for this turn with the Franger, so here I discarded the Grade 0 and the Grade 2. And so this blocks off Sentinels, Grade 0s, and Grade 2s when he's guarding against my Franger. And my Franger is only attacking for 23k, so it's not even that big. So honestly, looking back at this, this was a really big misplay on my part, because I should have really just not guarded with the Night Mist as I did last turn, because that was a really big misguard, I think. And instead of trying to gamble on this, the Franger, I should have just done it differently. So here I'm still attacking with my Basskirk, and he is 2 to passing it. I'm just confirming all the triggers in my drop zone, checking them in my damage zone. This was a really intense game, actually. We were both trying really hard. So here I get my 2 checks, no triggers, even though I think I have like 6 left. I had 6, almost half my deck was triggers, and I didn't get a single one, which would have changed the game entirely, because even 1 trigger on the Franger would have been great. But you can see, he guarded with the Grade 1 from hand and intercepted, and then he had a Perfect Guard. So that was it for my turn, and as I said, you know, looking back at it, the double Skull Dragon play with Night Mist would have been much better, but I just didn't see it at the time, and now you can see my hand is crippled. He can easily make good numbers, because, come on, this is Granblue. He's gonna rewrite the Basskirk to get himself another gift marker, and he's going to be able to use the Basskirk to counter +1, soul +1, and call himself another Skull Dragon. And then if he has a Night Mist in hand, he can call in even another one if he wants to. No, he's just going to go straight for the Night Mist. So he's going to call the Night Mist, and then obviously I think he's going to use that 1 counterblast from the Night Mist to call himself a Skull Dragon from the drop zone, which we can see he actually does have. And I counterblast the... Oh, no, he doesn't call... Okay, he makes the better play, which is actually to play the Evil Shade, as I mentioned, and then counterblast his last counterblast to bind the other Skull Dragon and call the last Skull Dragon to his field, which I think is the best play, because now he has a booster to his Vanguard, which actually did make an impact, because now it's much harder for me to guard his Vanguard in any way that isn't the imaginary gift marker. So I have to drop one of my Grade 2s. I have 15k shield left in my hand. He also gets a draw, which just completely, just ruins me. So I can still guard the Night Mist, because that's only a 15k attack. And, you know, that's perfectly fine. I can guard it by just dropping the Night Mist here. And then this attack I just can't guard, and I have to gamble on the heal, which I still did have in the deck. But sadly, it does not connect, and that's the end of the game. And that's going to be it for this deck preview, so I hope you guys enjoyed it. It is a longer one, but I think it makes sense because this deck is definitely quite complex, and I hope you still enjoyed the game. I know a lot of people were very upset with the Aquaforce one, it seemed, and so I try to, harder with this one to make sure that I go into everything in depth and explain every little card and try to stay as little opinionated as possible, I suppose. But outside of that, I hope you guys did enjoy it. Again, I did lose this game, but since we used the same deck, I felt like it was fine, because you could see that it really came down to card for card, like these very small decisions affecting really big things in the larger outcome, and it was same for both of us. And you could see that towards the end, he had low cards in hand. I think if I would have checked 1 trigger, it could have even been my game because of the restriction that I had with the Franger. But I hope you guys, don't judge me too much for the losses, because I know a lot of people do still ask for me to not just upload the games in which I win, but I just thought that this was a really good game that showcased what the deck does by also doing the mirror match, and so I hope you guys did enjoy it. But if you've stayed tuned until the end of this video, thank you very much, and as always, please do make sure to click the bell button and check out the social medias in the description and join the Discord channel if you haven't already. But on that note, that's going to be it for me today. Thank you once again to Solemn Vanguard for joining me for this video, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.